Welcome to a journey through time. Tonight, we travel to the vast steppes of Central Asia, where one man would rise from nothing to build the largest contiguous empire the world has ever known. This is the story of Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire, a tale of survival, unity, conquest, and legacy. Let the rhythm of history carry you gently into sleep as we explore the life of a boy named Temujin who would become the Great Khan. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let us begin. Our story begins in the year 1162, somewhere on the endless grasslands of Mongolia. The wind swept across the steppes as it always had, carrying the scent of wild grass and distant storms. In a small clan encampment, a child was born. His mother, Hoylin, held him close as the midwives noticed something unusual. The baby gripped a blood clot in his tiny fist, dark as a stone. The elders whispered among themselves. This was a sign, they said, a sign of a warrior's destiny. His father, Yasuge, a minor chieftain of the Borjigin tribe, named the boy Temujin. The name came from a Tatar warrior Yasuge had recently captured. It was a name that meant blacksmith, a maker of iron. No one could know then that this child would one day forge not metal, but an empire. The Mongolian steppes were a harsh place to grow. Life moved with the seasons. Families lived in round felt tents called gurs, following their herds of horses, sheep, and goats across the grasslands. Survival depended on strength, cunning, and loyalty to one's tribe. The clans were constantly shifting, forming alliances and breaking them just as quickly. Temujin's early years were shaped by the rhythm of nomadic life. He learned to ride before he could fully walk. He learned to shoot arrows from horseback, to track animals, to read the weather in the clouds. His father was a respected leader, but not a powerful one. The Borjigin clan was small, and enemies surrounded them on all sides. When Temujin was 9 years old, his father took him on a journey. It was time for the boy to be betrothed. Among the Mongols, marriages were arranged early to strengthen alliances between clans. They traveled to the lands of Hoylin's tribe, the Olkunud. There, Yasuge hoped to find a suitable match for his son. Along the way, they stopped at the camp of a man named Dei Sechen. He had a daughter, a bright-eyed girl named Berthe. She was slightly older than Temujin, but when the two children met, something unspoken passed between them. Dei Sechen agreed to the match. Temujin would stay with Berthe's family for a time, as was the custom, to learn their ways and prove himself worthy. Yasuge prepared to return home, leaving his son behind. He embraced Temujin and gave him words of guidance. "Be strong," he said. "Be loyal. Remember who you are." But Yasuge would never see his son become a man. On his journey home, Yasuge stopped at a Tatar camp. The Tatars were old enemies of the Mongols, and though they offered him food and hospitality, it was a trap. They poisoned his drink. Yasuge grew ill quickly. He managed to make it back to his camp, but the poison had already done its work. Within days, he was dead. Temujin was summoned home. He arrived to find his family in chaos. His father's death had left them vulnerable. The clan elders gathered and made a cruel decision. Without Yasuge's leadership, they would not support his widow and children. Hoylin and her young family were cast out, abandoned on the steppes. It was a death sentence. But Hoylen was strong. She gathered her children and led them into the wilderness. They survived on wild plants, fish from the rivers, and whatever small game they could catch. Temujin and his brothers learned to endure hunger, cold, and constant fear. They had no protection, no allies. They were alone. One day, a dispute arose between Temujin and his half-brother, Begtar. Begtar had been hoarding food, refusing to share with the younger children. Temujin and his full brother, Hasar, confronted Begtar. The argument escalated. In a moment of rage and desperation, Temujin killed him. Hoylen was furious. She rebuked her son harshly. But the act revealed something about Temujin. He would not tolerate betrayal, even from his own blood. Survival on the steppes had made him ruthless. Years passed. Temujin grew into a young man, lean and hardened by suffering, but his troubles were far from over. One day, riders from the Taichiud clan, distant relatives who had once been part of Yasuge's alliance, came to capture him. They saw him as a potential threat, a rival who might one day seek revenge for his family's abandonment. They placed a wooden collar around his neck, a heavy Kong that prevented him from lifting his hands to his face. He was paraded through their camps, humiliated and helpless. But Temujin was patient. He waited for his moment. During a celebration, when his captors were drunk and distracted, he struck one of the guards with the Kong and fled into the darkness. He hid in the cold river, submerged up to his nose, breathing quietly as the Taichiud searched for him. A young man from the enemy camp, perhaps moved by pity or admiration, found him but said nothing. He let Temujin escape. Temujin never forgot kindness, just as he never forgot cruelty. He returned to his family, but he knew he could not survive alone forever. He needed allies. He needed power. He thought of Berthe, the girl to whom he had been promised. It was time to claim his bride. Temujin journeyed back to the lands of the Olkanud people, to the family of Day Sechin. He came with little to offer, just a young man hardened by loss, but carrying the name of his father. Day Sechin remembered Yasuge. He honored the promise made years before. Berthe was given to Temujin as his wife. As a wedding gift, Berthe's mother presented her with a gift of great value, a coat made of black sable fur. It was a treasure among the Mongols, a symbol of wealth and status. Temujin realized this coat could be more than a garment. It could be a tool, a key to forging the alliances he desperately needed. He thought of Togrul, a powerful Khan who ruled the Kurite tribe. Togrul had once been an ally, a blood brother to Temujin's father. Temujin traveled to Togrul's camp and presented the sable coat as a gift. He spoke with respect, invoking the memory of Yasuge. Togrul was impressed by the young man's courage and intelligence. He agreed to become Temujin's protector, his patron in the complex world of steppe politics. This alliance would prove vital. But peace was fragile on the steppes. Not long after his marriage, catastrophe struck. A rival clan, the Merkits, launched a raid on Temujin's camp. They came at dawn, swift and merciless. The Merkits had a long memory. Years earlier, Yasuge had stolen Hoylen from a Merkit warrior. Now they sought revenge. Temujin and his brothers barely escaped, fleeing into the mountains, but Berthe was captured. The loss cut Temujin deeply. His wife, taken by enemies, her fate unknown. But instead of despair, he felt something else: determination, rage, a cold, focused will. He would get her back. Temujin called on Togrul for help. The older Khan agreed to send warriors, but Temujin needed more. He reached out to another young leader he had befriended in his youth, Jamuka. Jamuka was charismatic, a skilled warrior, and commanded his own band of followers. Together, this alliance formed a powerful force. Togrul's Karaites, Jamuka's warriors, and Temujin's small but loyal band. They rode against the Merkits. The battle was swift and brutal. The Merkits were caught unprepared. Temujin's forces swept through their camps, scattering the enemy. And there, among the captives being freed, Temujin found Bertay. She was alive, but she was also pregnant. The question hung unspoken in the air. Was the child Temujin's, conceived before her capture, or was it the result of her time with the Merkits? Temujin made a choice that defined his character. He accepted Bertay without question, without reproach. When the child was born, a boy, Temujin claimed him as his own. The boy was named Jochi, which means guest. Through the uncertainty surrounding Jochi's parentage, Temujin demonstrated loyalty, and Bertay remained his partner, his most trusted companion for the rest of his life. The victory over the Merkits brought Temujin recognition. Other clans began to notice this young leader who honored alliances and showed both mercy and strength. Temujin and Jamuka became close, so close they declared themselves Anda, sworn brothers. They shared everything, their dreams, their ambitions, their vision for the future. But the steppes were not kind to friendship. As Temujin's following grew, tensions began to emerge. People were drawn to him. They admired his fairness, his strategic mind, his willingness to reward loyalty regardless of birth. Jamuka was different. He was a traditionalist, believing power should remain with the old aristocratic families. Temujin believed in meritocracy. The best warrior, the most loyal follower, deserved advancement. The two men began to drift apart. One night, Jamuka suggested they move camp. Temujin agreed, but Bertay sensed something was wrong. She urged her husband to be cautious. That night, Temujin quietly led his followers in a different direction. It was a subtle break, but a break nonetheless. Jamuka felt betrayed. The sworn brotherhood was over. Over the next years, the steppes became a chessboard. Clans chose sides. Some followed Jamuka, drawn by his noble lineage and traditional values. Others flocked to Temujin. His reputation grew. He was fair in distributing loot. He promoted based on ability. He protected those who pledged loyalty to him. Slowly, steadily, Temujin was building something new. Not just another clan, but a different kind of society. In 1189, a group of Mongol chieftains gathered and made a historic decision. They elected Temujin as their Khan. It was not yet universal. Many clans still opposed him, but it was a beginning. He took the title seriously. He began organizing his followers not by tribal affiliation, but by military units, groups of 10, 100, 1,000. Loyalty was to the Khan, not to the old clan structures. This was revolutionary. The old guard, including Jamuka, saw the threat. If Temujin succeeded, the entire traditional power structure of the steppes would crumble. War was inevitable. In 1190, the armies met at Dalan Baljut. Temujin commanded roughly 30,000 warriors. Jamuka commanded more. The battle was fierce. Temujin fought with everything he had, but Jamuka's forces prevailed. Temujin was forced to retreat. His army scattered. It was a devastating defeat. Many leaders would have given up. The steppes had seen countless Khans rise and fall. But Temujin was different. In defeat, he showed his true character. He gathered his remaining followers. He did not blame them for the loss. Instead, he thanked them for their loyalty. He tended to the wounded personally. He shared what little food remained. He mourned the dead with genuine grief. His enemies expected him to fade away. Instead, his legend grew. Warriors who had fought against him began to defect. They had seen how Jamuja treated his captives, boiling 70 young men alive as punishment. They had seen how Temujin treated his followers with respect and fairness. The choice became clear. Slowly, over months and years, Temujin rebuilt. He formed new alliances. He struck at his enemies with precision, avoiding large battles he couldn't win. He was patient. He was learning. And the steppes were beginning to understand. A new kind of leader had emerged. The years following the defeat at Dalen Baljut were years of transformation. Temujin moved carefully, deliberately, like a wolf circling its prey. He understood that military might alone would not unite the Mongol tribes. He needed strategy, diplomacy, and a vision that others could believe in. His alliance with Togrul of the Karites remained strong. Together, they launched campaigns against common enemies. In 1196, the Jin dynasty of northern China requested assistance against the Tatars. Togrul and Temujin answered the call. The Tatars were the same tribe that had poisoned Temujin's father. This campaign was both political and personal. The allied Mongol and Karite forces crushed the Tatars. The Jin dynasty rewarded Togrul with a Chinese title, recognizing him as Wang Khan, a king. Temujin received a lesser title, but something more valuable: recognition as a legitimate leader. After the campaign, Temujin made a decision that shocked the steppes. Rather than enslaving the defeated Tatars, he gave them a choice. Join him, accept his leadership, and they would be treated as equals, or resist and face elimination. Many Tatar warriors chose to join. Temujin kept his word. He integrated them into his forces, judging them by their loyalty and skill, not their tribal origin. This policy of assimilation became a cornerstone of Temujin's strategy. The old system kept tribes divided, feuding endlessly. Temujin was building something unified. But not everyone appreciated this new vision. Around the turn of the century, tensions with Togrul began to surface. The Wang Khan's son, Sengam, was jealous of Temujin's growing influence. Sengam whispered poison in his father's ear. Temujin was becoming too powerful. He would soon be a threat. Togrul was torn. Temujin had been loyal, but his own son's concerns gnawed at him. In 1203, Togrul and Sengam laid a trap. They invited Temujin to a feast to celebrate a proposed marriage alliance between their families. But Temujin had informants. Two of Togrul's own men, uneasy with the betrayal, sent warning. Temujin did not attend the feast. Instead, he prepared for war. The conflict that followed was bitter. Togrul and Sengam attacked, but Temujin's forces fought desperately. The initial battles went poorly. Temujin was forced to retreat to the Baljuna Lake, a remote and desolate place. He arrived with only a handful of followers, 19 men, according to legend. Loyal companions who had lost everything to stay by his side. At the lake, they drank the muddy water and swore an oath. They would rise again. They would remember who stood by them in the darkest hour. This moment, this covenant of the Baljuna, became legendary among the Mongols. Those who shared that water would be honored for generations. And Temujin kept his word. In the following months, something remarkable happened. Warriors from across the steppes, even from Togrul's own tribe, began to defect to Temujin. They had heard of his fairness, his loyalty, his vision. They were tired of the old ways, the endless feuds, the arbitrary cruelty of aristocratic leaders. By the time Temujin struck back, his army had grown larger than before. The decisive battle came in 1203. Temujin's forces met the Karaites in open combat. The fighting was intense, but Temujin had superior tactics and more motivated warriors. The Karaites broke and fled. Togrul tried to escape, but was killed by a border patrol, not even recognizing who he was. Sangam fled west, eventually dying in obscurity. The Karaite Confederation, once the most powerful force on the steppes, was no more. Temujin absorbed the Karaite warriors into his army. He took Togrul's title of Khan, but he would soon claim something greater. With the Karaites defeated, only a few major powers remained unconquered. The Naimans, a powerful tribe to the west, saw the threat clearly. Their Khan, Taiyang, gathered his forces for a final confrontation. Taiyang made a fatal mistake. He underestimated Temujin, dismissing him as a lucky upstart. In 1204, the armies met at Checker Mount. Temujin employed brilliant tactics, feigning retreats, using scouts to gather intelligence, coordinating his units with precision. The Naimans fought bravely, but they were outmaneuvered at every turn. Taiyang was killed in battle. The Naiman Confederation collapsed. The western steppes were now under Temujin's control. One enemy remained personal: Jamuja, his former sworn brother. Jamuja had continued to fight, allying with whoever would oppose Temujin. But by 1205, his options had run out. His own followers, seeing the inevitable, betrayed him. They delivered Jamuja to Temujin in chains. Temujin was saddened by the sight. Despite everything, he remembered their friendship. He had Jamuja's captors executed for betraying their own leader. Deep, slow, soothing, hypnotic. Then he spoke with Jamuja privately. He offered forgiveness. He offered a place at his side. They could be brothers again. But Jamuja refused. He knew he could never truly submit. He asked instead for an honorable death. Temujin granted his request. According to Mongol tradition, Jamuja was executed without spilling his blood, his body left intact. It was said that Temujin mourned him afterward. With Jamuja's death, the last major opposition on the Mongolian steppes was gone. In 1206, a great assembly was called, a Khuriltai, a gathering of all the Mongol tribes. They met at the source of the Onan River, a sacred place. Thousands of warriors and chieftains gathered. The felt banner of the united tribes fluttered in the wind. And there, before all the people of the steppes, Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan. The title meant universal ruler, the oceanic Khan, the Khan of all Khans. It was not merely a promotion, it was the declaration of a new era. The Mongol tribes, fractured for centuries, were now one people, one army, one empire. Genghis Khan stood before his people and made promises. He promised law where there had been chaos. He promised merit over birth. He promised that loyalty would be rewarded and betrayal punished. He promised that together they would achieve what no steppe people had ever achieved. They would conquer the world. And Genghis Khan always kept his promises. The unification of the Mongol tribes was only the beginning. Genghis Khan understood that unity required more than military victory. It required structure, law, and purpose. In the years immediately following his elevation, Genghis Khan transformed Mongol society from the ground up. He created the Yasa, a code of laws that applied to all Mongols equally. These laws were strict but fair. Theft was punished harshly. Betrayal meant death. But loyalty was rewarded generously. Religious tolerance was enshrined, a revolutionary concept in an age of religious warfare. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and shamanists all found a place in the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan reorganized the military into a decimal system. Units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, each with clear chains of command. But perhaps his most radical reform was the breaking of tribal identity. Warriors were mixed, assigned to units regardless of their original clan. A soldier's loyalty was to his unit, his commander, and ultimately to the Khan. The old tribal feuds were rendered meaningless. He also created the Keshig, an elite imperial guard. But it served another purpose. The sons of nobles and chieftains were required to serve in the Keshig. They were hostages, in a sense, ensuring their family's loyalty. But they were also trained in Genghis Khan's methods, becoming devoted to his vision. With the internal structure secure, Genghis Khan turned his attention outward. The Mongol heartland was poor. The steppes provided horses and warriors, but little else. Wealth lay in the sedentary civilizations to the south and west, the great kingdoms of China, Persia, and beyond. But Genghis Khan did not rush. He was patient, methodical. His first target was the Western Xia, a kingdom in northwestern China. They controlled valuable trade routes and had once demanded tribute from the Mongol tribes. In 1209, Genghis Khan launched his first major foreign campaign. The Mongol army moved like nothing the Western Xia had ever seen. Fast, coordinated, utterly ruthless. The Western Xia had fortified cities, something the Mongols initially struggled to assault. But Genghis Khan was a quick learner. He recruited Chinese engineers, experts in siege warfare. They brought knowledge of catapults, siege towers, and mining techniques. The Mongols adapted, they learned, and they never made the same mistake twice. City after city fell. When the Western Xia offered peace and tribute, Genghis Khan accepted. For now. He had learned something valuable. Siege warfare was possible, and engineers could be as valuable as warriors. Next came the Jin dynasty, the powerful empire that controlled northern China. The Jin had once been overlords of the steppes, demanding tribute from Mongol tribes. Genghis Khan remembered. In 1211, he launched his invasion. The Jin dynasty was rich, powerful, with millions of subjects and vast armies. But the Jin were unprepared for Mongol tactics. The Mongols did not fight like civilized armies. They used speed, deception, feigned retreats, and total warfare. The Mongol cavalry would appear suddenly, devastate an army, and vanish before reinforcements arrived. They used terror as a weapon, spreading stories of their invincibility. Cities that resisted were utterly destroyed. Those that surrendered peacefully were often spared. Genghis Khan understood psychology. Fear could conquer as effectively as swords. By 1213, the Mongols had captured most of northern China. The Jin emperor fled his capital, Jiangdu, modern-day Beijing. When the city finally fell in 1215,
It was said the streets ran with blood. The Mongols had been patient during the siege, but their fury when the walls broke was terrible. Yet even in conquest, Genghis Khan showed his strategic mind. He appointed capable administrators, often from the conquered peoples. He understood that ruling an empire required different skills than conquering one. Chinese bureaucrats, Muslim merchants, and Christian advisors all found roles in the growing Mongol administration. The Jin dynasty would continue to resist in southern China for years, but their power was broken. Genghis Khan had achieved what he set out to do. Now, his attention turned west. The Khwarezmian Empire stretched across Central Asia, from modern-day Iran to Afghanistan and beyond. It was wealthy, controlling the vital Silk Road trade routes. Genghis Khan initially sought trade, not conquest. He sent a caravan of merchants, Muslims under Mongol protection, carrying goods and gifts. They arrived at the city of Otrar, on the border of the Khwarezmian Empire. The governor of Otrar, a man named Inalchuk, made a catastrophic decision. He accused the merchants of being spies and had them executed. Their goods were seized. When news reached Genghis Khan, he sent ambassadors to the Khwarezmian Shah, demanding justice and the surrender of the guilty governor. The Shah, Muhammad II, was arrogant. He had the ambassadors killed, a grave insult. Genghis Khan had been willing to trade. He had offered peace. Now there would be war. In 1219, Genghis Khan assembled an army of perhaps 200,000 warriors. He divided his sons and generals into separate columns. The Mongol invasion of Khwarezm was a masterpiece of coordinated strategy. Multiple armies struck simultaneously across a vast front. Cities fell in rapid succession. Bukhara, one of the greatest cities of the Islamic world, was captured. Genghis Khan himself entered the Great Mosque and declared that he was the punishment of God. Samarkand, another jewel of civilization, fell after a brief siege. The Shah's army, vastly larger than the Mongol force, disintegrated. Muhammad II fled west, chased by Mongol generals Jebe and Subutai. They pursued him relentlessly, across Persia into the Caucasus. The Shah died on an island in the Caspian Sea, broken and alone. His son, Jalal-ad-Din, tried to continue the fight. He was a capable commander and won a few victories, but Genghis Khan himself pursued him. At the Indus River, Jalal-ad-Din made a last stand. His army was crushed. He escaped by riding his horse off a cliff into the river and swimming to the far shore. Genghis Khan, watching from the opposite bank, reportedly said, "A son should be such as that."
Narrator: the Khwarezmian Empire was utterly destroyed. Cities that resisted, like Nishapur and Merv, were razed so thoroughly that they would never fully recover. It was said that not even cats and dogs were left alive in Nishapur. Whether literal or exaggerated, the message was clear. Resistance meant annihilation. But again, Genghis Khan was not simply a destroyer. Cities that surrendered peacefully were often spared. Artisans, scholars, and administrators were valuable and were relocated to serve the empire. While the campaign in Persia concluded, Jebe and Subutai continued west. They rode through the Caucasus, into the steppes north of the Black Sea. There they encountered the Kievan Rus and the Cumans. An alliance of Russian princes and Cuman warriors gathered to stop them. In 1223, at the Battle of the Kalka River, the Mongols annihilated a force much larger than their own. The Russian princes, uncoordinated and overconfident, were systematically destroyed. It was the first time Europe would feel the Mongol threat. Jebe and Subutai then rode back east, completing a circuit of thousands of miles. They had gathered intelligence on lands from Persia to Russia. The information would prove valuable for future campaigns. By 1225, Genghis Khan returned to Mongolia. He had conquered an empire stretching from China to Persia. But he was not finished. There was one last score to settle. The Western Jia had submitted to Genghis Khan years earlier. They had promised tribute, allegiance, and military support when requested. But when Genghis Khan called for their assistance during the Khwarezmian campaign, they refused. Their ruler sent a dismissive reply. If the Mongols could not conquer without Western Jia's help, the message implied, then they were not worthy of ruling. It was a fatal mistake. Genghis Khan never forgot an insult, and he never forgave betrayal. In 1226, despite his advancing age, Genghis Khan personally led an army against the Western Jia. The campaign was brutal. City after city was destroyed. The Mongols showed no mercy. But during the siege of one city, an accident occurred. Genghis Khan fell from his horse during a hunt. He was injured, though accounts vary on the severity. Some sources say he was wounded by an arrow during a siege. Others say he fell ill. Whatever the cause, Genghis Khan knew his time was limited. Yet he pressed on. The Western Jia would be punished. He had made that promise. By 1227, the Western Jia capital was under siege. Their ruler, desperate, offered complete surrender. Genghis Khan accepted, but on harsh terms. The ruler would come in person to submit. In August of 1227, somewhere in the Liupan Mountains, Genghis Khan died. He was approximately 65 years old. The exact cause of death remains debated. Battle wounds, illness, the fall from his horse, perhaps a combination of all three. But before he died, he gave final instructions to his sons and generals. The Western Jia were to be completely destroyed, their royal family executed, their cities razed, their name erased from history. And so it was done. Genghis Khan's death was kept secret initially. His commanders knew that revealing his death during the campaign could cause chaos. The Western Jia were annihilated. When the ruler came to surrender, he was executed. Only after the campaign concluded was Genghis Khan's death announced. His body was taken back to Mongolia. According to legend, everyone who saw the funeral procession was killed to keep the burial site secret. To this day, the location of Genghis Khan's tomb remains unknown. Somewhere in the mountains of Mongolia, the great Khan rests. His death marked the end of an era, but not the end of the Mongol Empire. He had built something that would outlast him. Before his death, Genghis Khan had divided the empire among his sons, though he designated his third son, Ogedei, as his successor. Jochi, the eldest, received the western territories. There had always been questions about his legitimacy, and though Genghis Khan treated him as a son, Jochi was not chosen as supreme Khan. Chagatai, the second son, received Central Asia. He was a strict adherent to Mongol law, but lacked Ogedei's diplomatic skills. Ogedei was chosen for his administrative ability and balanced temperament.
He could unite the family and continue the expansion. The youngest, Tolui, received the Mongol heartland, following tradition that the youngest son inherited the family home. But Tolui's descendants would later prove the most significant, producing Mongke, Kublai, and Hulagu. After a period of mourning, a Hurultai was held in 1229. Ugadai was confirmed as the Great Khan. Under Ugadai's rule, the empire continued to expand. He was less brilliant than his father, but more organized. He established a permanent capital at Karakoram, creating administrative structures that formalized the empire's governance. He completed the conquest of the Jin dynasty, which had clung to survival in southern China. He sent armies west into Europe. Under the command of Batu Khan, Jochi's son, and the brilliant general Subutai, the Mongols invaded Russia, Poland, and Hungary. In 1241, the Mongols won stunning victories at Legnica in Poland and Mohi in Hungary. The armies of Europe were shattered. The way to Western Europe lay open. Vienna, Paris, Rome, all seemed vulnerable. But then Ugadai died in December of 1241. According to Mongol law, all campaigns had to cease, and the generals had to return for the election of a new Great Khan. Batu and Subutai withdrew from Europe. The invasion was never resumed. Europe had been saved, not by military might, but by the death of a Khan thousands of miles away. The succession was complicated. Ugadai's widow, Toregene, acted as regent. She maneuvered politically to have her son Guyuk elected. Guyuk became Great Khan in 1246, but he died in 1248, possibly poisoned. The empire was fracturing. The unity Genghis Khan had forged was straining under the ambitions of his descendants. After Guyuk's death, Batu Khan, the most powerful of the princes, supported the election of Mongke, Tolui's son. Mongke became Great Khan in 1251. He was capable, restoring order and discipline. Under Mongke, the Mongols launched new campaigns. His brother Hulagu was sent to conquer the Middle East. Hulagu's campaign was devastating. In 1258, he captured Baghdad, the heart of the Islamic world. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had ruled for 5 centuries, was destroyed. The last caliph was executed. Libraries were burned. The House of Wisdom, one of history's great centers of learning, was destroyed. The Tigris River was said to run black with ink from the books thrown into it. It was one of history's great cultural catastrophes. Hulagu continued west, but in 1260, Mongke died during a campaign in China. Once again, succession pulled the empire apart. Hulagu could not continue his campaign. He had to return. In his absence, the Mamluks of Egypt defeated the Mongol force left behind at the Battle of Ain Jalut. It was the first major Mongol defeat. The tide had turned. Back in the east, another of Tolui's sons, Kublai, claimed the title of Great Khan. But not all agreed. His younger brother, Arikboke, also claimed the throne.
Narrator. Civil war erupted. Kublai eventually won, but the empire was never truly unified again. The various khanates became increasingly independent. Kublai focused on China. He completed the conquest of the Song dynasty in southern China, a campaign that took decades. In 1271, he declared a new dynasty, the Yuan. He became the Emperor of China. Kublai Khan ruled from his capital at Khanbalik, modern-day Beijing. He embraced Chinese culture while maintaining Mongol identity. His court was visited by travelers from across the world, including a Venetian merchant named Marco Polo. Marco Polo's accounts of his time in China would fascinate Europe for centuries, though some modern scholars debate their accuracy. Under Kublai, the Mongol Empire reached its greatest extent, but also its limits. He attempted to invade Japan twice. Both times, his fleets were destroyed by typhoons, which the Japanese called kamikaze, divine winds. He tried to conquer Southeast Asia with mixed results. Vietnam resisted fiercely. The Mongol military machine, unbeatable on the open steppes, struggled in unfamiliar terrain. By the time Kublai died in 1294, the empire was vast but fragmented. The four khanates, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan in China, operated independently. They were united in name by the legacy of Genghis Khan, but in practice they were separate empires. The Mongol Empire that Genghis Khan founded was the largest contiguous land empire in human history. At its peak, it stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, from Siberia to Southeast Asia. It encompassed dozens of cultures, languages, and religions. An estimated 100 million people lived under Mongol rule, roughly a quarter of the world's population at the time. But what did this empire mean? Was it merely destruction, or was there something more? The answer is complex. There is no denying the devastation the Mongols brought. Conservative estimates suggest that tens of millions died during the Mongol conquests. Cities were razed, entire populations were slaughtered. The campaigns in Persia and China in particular caused demographic catastrophes from which some regions took centuries to recover. The Mongols used terror deliberately. The policy was simple: surrender peacefully and you would be spared, even protected. Resist, and your city would be an example to others. This ruthlessness has made Genghis Khan a controversial figure. In the lands that suffered most, he is remembered as a destroyer, a symbol of horror. But there is another side to the legacy. The Mongol Empire facilitated trade and communication on a scale never before seen. The Silk Road, which had declined in previous centuries, flourished under Mongol rule. Merchants could travel from Europe to China with Mongol protection. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, made this possible. Ideas, technologies, and goods flowed freely. Paper and printing technology from China reached the West. Persian astronomy and mathematics influenced both East and West. The Mongols themselves were remarkably tolerant. Genghis Khan's law of religious freedom meant that Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and others coexisted within the empire. This was extraordinary in an age of religious warfare. The Mongol court included advisors from all faiths. Genghis Khan's meritocratic principles also left a mark. Talent and loyalty mattered more than birth. This allowed capable individuals from any background to rise. A shepherd could become a general. A captured engineer could become an advisor. It was a form of social mobility rare in medieval societies. The Mongols also brought administrative efficiency. They created a postal system, the yam, that allowed messages to travel vast distances quickly. They standardized weights and measures across their empire. They created a written script for the Mongolian language, borrowing from the Uyghur alphabet. They conducted censuses, understanding that effective rule required information. In many ways, the Mongol Empire functioned as a bridge between civilizations. Technologies and ideas that might have taken centuries to spread moved in decades.
Some historians argue that the Mongol conquests, despite their violence, accelerated global integration and set the stage for the modern world. Others counter that the same exchanges could have occurred through peaceful trade without the accompanying destruction. Both perspectives contain truth. After Kublai Khan's death, the various khanates continued for decades, some for centuries. The Yuan dynasty in China faced growing resistance. Chinese rebels, resentful of foreign rule, launched uprisings. In 1368, the Ming dynasty drove the Mongols out of China. The Yuan remnants retreated to the steppes, becoming the Northern Yuan. They continued as a power in Mongolia, but never regained their former glory. The Ilkhanate in Persia collapsed in the 1330s, fragmenting into smaller states. The Chagatai Khanate split into eastern and western sections, eventually giving rise to Timur, or Tamerlane, who claimed descent from Genghis Khan and built his own empire in the 1400s. The Golden Horde in Russia lasted the longest, maintaining power until the late 1500s. Their rule over the Russian principalities had lasting effects on Russian culture and politics. Moscow's rise to prominence was partly due to its role as a tax collector for the Golden Horde. As the Khanates declined, the memory of Genghis Khan took on different meanings in different places. In Mongolia, he became a symbol of national pride, the unifier, the greatest of all Mongols. In China, he was seen ambiguously. A conqueror, yes, but also the founder of a dynasty that was part of Chinese history. In the Islamic world, he was remembered as a catastrophe, the destroyer of Baghdad, the end of the Abbasid Caliphate. In Russia, the period of Mongol rule, the Tatar yoke, was remembered as a time of oppression, though modern historians note it was more complex than simple subjugation. In the West, Genghis Khan became a symbol of the ultimate barbarian, a figure of fear and fascination. But as centuries passed, reassessment began. Scholars started examining Mongol governance, their legal code, their religious tolerance. They noted that many of the atrocities attributed to the Mongols were exaggerated by medieval chroniclers who had their own biases. Not that the Mongols were innocent, far from it. War in the medieval period was brutal everywhere, but context matters. Genetic studies in the late 20th century revealed something astonishing. Roughly 16 million men alive today, about 0.5% of the world's male population, carry a Y chromosome lineage traced back to Mongolia around the time of Genghis Khan. While it cannot be proven definitively that this lineage belongs to Genghis Khan himself, the correlation is striking. It speaks to the scale of Mongol expansion and the integration of Mongol nobility into local populations across Asia. Modern Mongolia has embraced Genghis Khan as a national hero. His image appears on currency, in monuments, and in popular culture. After decades of Soviet influence, which downplayed Genghis Khan's legacy, independent Mongolia reclaimed him as a symbol of resilience and national identity. But elsewhere, the debate continues. Was Genghis Khan a visionary who united disparate peoples and facilitated global exchange? Or was he a tyrant whose conquests caused suffering on an unimaginable scale? Perhaps he was both. History is rarely simple. Great figures often embody contradictions. Genghis Khan created laws that protected widows and orphans. He promoted literacy and learning. He valued loyalty and punished betrayal consistently. But he also ordered the destruction of cities, the execution of entire populations, the spread of terror as policy. He was a product of his time and his environment. The steppes were harsh. Survival required strength. Mercy was a luxury tribes could rarely afford. Yet Genghis Khan transcended his origins.
Narrator. He built an empire not just through conquest, but through vision. He imagined a world where Mongol law applied universally, where trade was protected, where ability mattered more than birth. In some ways, he was ahead of his time. His legacy is woven into the fabric of Eurasia. The borders he crossed, the trade routes he secured, the peoples he brought into contact, all of these shaped the world that followed. Without the Mongol Empire, world history would look very different. The Renaissance in Europe was influenced by ideas and technologies that came through Mongol-controlled trade routes. The rise of Russia as a unified state was shaped by centuries of Mongol rule. The modern Middle East was altered by the destruction of the Abbasid Caliphate and the political realignments that followed. China's history, too, was forever changed. The Yuan dynasty left cultural and administrative marks that persisted long after the Mongols were expelled. As you drift toward sleep, consider the paradox of Genghis Khan, a man born into obscurity, abandoned by his tribe, who rose to command the largest empire in history. A warrior who valued loyalty above all, yet who could order the annihilation of those who defied him. A nomad from the steppes who facilitated the exchange of ideas between the world's great civilizations. His story is one of ambition, ruthlessness, vision, and legacy. He changed the world, for better and for worse. And 800 years after his death, we are still grappling with what that means. One cannot understand the success of Genghis Khan without understanding the Mongol military. It was, quite simply, the most effective fighting force of its era. But what made it so formidable? The foundation was the Mongol horse. Small, sturdy, and incredibly resilient. A Mongol warrior would typically have multiple horses, allowing him to switch mounts and travel vast distances without rest. These horses could survive on grass alone, requiring no grain or special feed. They could even dig through snow to find vegetation in winter. This gave the Mongol army strategic mobility no other force could match. From childhood, every Mongol learned to ride. Boys and girls alike grew up on horseback. By the time a Mongol entered military service, riding was as natural as walking. They could shoot arrows accurately while riding at full gallop. They could control their horses with their knees alone, leaving both hands free for weapons. This level of horsemanship took years to develop. It could not be replicated by the armies they faced. The Mongol composite bow was another critical advantage. Made from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, it was incredibly powerful. A Mongol bow could shoot an arrow over 300 meters with lethal force. It outranged most bows used by their enemies. Mongol warriors carried multiple quivers with different types of arrows for different purposes. Light arrows for long range, heavy arrows with broadheads for close combat, whistling arrows for signaling. Every Mongol warrior was an archer, but many also carried lances, sabers, or axes for close combat. They wore armor, typically lamellar plates of hardened leather or iron, designed to be light enough for horseback archery, but strong enough to deflect most blows. But technology alone did not make the Mongols invincible. Organization and tactics were equally important. Genghis Khan's decimal system meant that every warrior knew his place. A unit of 10 operated as a tight-knit team. They fought together, trained together, lived together. Discipline was absolute. A unit that fled without orders could be executed. But commanders were expected to lead from the front, sharing the same risks as their men. This created a balance. Warriors followed orders because they trusted their commanders to be competent and to care about their lives. Promotion was based on merit. A talented warrior from a humble background could rise to command thousands. This meritocracy meant that Mongol commanders were generally more skilled than the hereditary nobles who led many of the armies they faced.
Mongol tactics emphasized speed, deception, and overwhelming force at critical points. They rarely fought fair battles. Instead, they maneuvered to create advantages. The feigned retreat was a classic Mongol tactic. They would appear to flee, drawing the enemy into pursuit. The enemy, believing they had won, would lose formation. Then the Mongols would turn and counterattack, often with fresh units hidden nearby. The disorganized enemy would be slaughtered. This tactic worked against the Rus, the Hungarians, the Persians, and countless others. The Mongols also excelled at reconnaissance. They used scouts extensively, gathering detailed information about enemy positions, terrain, and resources. Before a major campaign, Mongol generals often had better maps and intelligence than the defenders. They coordinated multiple armies across vast distances. Separate columns would attack simultaneously, hundreds of miles apart, preventing enemies from concentrating their forces. Communication was maintained through the yam, the postal relay system. Messages could travel at incredible speeds. When facing fortified cities, the Mongols adapted. Initially, siege warfare was their weakness. Nomads had little experience with walls and towers. But Genghis Khan recruited engineers from every conquered land. Chinese, Persian, and European specialists brought their expertise. The Mongols learned to use catapults, trebuchets, and siege towers. They learned mining techniques, digging under walls to collapse them. They also used psychological warfare. Refugees fleeing a conquered city would spread stories of Mongol ruthlessness, terrifying the next target. Sometimes cities surrendered without a fight, simply from fear. This saved Mongol lives and resources. When cities did resist and were taken, the Mongols made examples of them. The message was clear: surrender peacefully and live, resist and die. This was brutal, but from a strategic perspective, effective. It reduced the number of sieges the Mongols had to fight. Logistics were another strength. The Mongol army traveled light. Warriors carried dried meat and milk products that could sustain them for weeks. They could slaughter horses for food if necessary, though they preferred not to. The blood of horses could even be consumed in emergencies. This meant the Mongol army was not tied to supply lines the way traditional armies were. They could appear in places enemies thought impossible. The Mongols also practiced total war. They did not distinguish sharply between soldiers and civilians in enemy territory. Everyone who supported the enemy was a target. Farms were burned, populations were enslaved or killed. The goal was to break the enemy's will to fight. This approach horrified medieval observers, but it was pragmatically effective. Regions that suffered Mongol devastation often lacked the resources to resist a second time. After conquering a territory, the Mongols were usually pragmatic. Logistics were another strength. The Mongol army traveled light. Warriors carried dried meat and milk products that could sustain them for weeks. They could slaughter horses for food if necessary, though they preferred not to. The blood of horses could even be consumed in emergencies. This meant the Mongol army was not tied to supply lines the way traditional armies were. They could appear in places enemies thought impossible. The Mongols also practiced total war. They did not distinguish sharply between soldiers and civilians in enemy territory. Everyone who supported the enemy was a target. Farms were burned, populations were enslaved or killed. The goal was to break the enemy's will to fight. This approach horrified medieval observers, but it was pragmatically effective. Regions that suffered Mongol devastation often lacked the resources to resist a second time. After conquering a territory, the Mongols were usually pragmatic.
Narrator. They allowed local rulers to remain in power as long as they paid tribute and provided troops when requested. The Mongols did not have enough people to administer vast conquered territories directly. They relied on local elites, supervised by Mongol governors and tax collectors. This system worked well in many places. The Mongols provided security and facilitated trade, which benefited local economies. Of course, the cost was submission to Mongol authority. Any hint of rebellion was crushed instantly and mercilessly. The Mongol military also incorporated foreign troops. As the empire expanded, Chinese, Persian, Turkish, and Russian soldiers fought under Mongol banners. These auxiliary troops were often used for garrison duty or siege work, while the Mongol cavalry remained the elite strike force. One of the most feared Mongol tactics was the Nurge, a large-scale hunt used for both training and entertainment. Thousands of warriors would form a line and slowly drive game animals into an ever-shrinking circle. It could take weeks. At the end, the animals would be trapped and the warriors would practice their skills. It was also a display of coordination and discipline. The Nurge doubled as military training. The same techniques used to encircle animals could encircle enemy armies. Several major Mongol victories involved surrounding the enemy and annihilating them in this manner. The Mongol military was not invincible, however. They faced defeats, particularly in unfamiliar terrain. Jungle warfare in Southeast Asia was difficult. The heavy cavalry that dominated open plains struggled in dense forests and rice paddies. Naval warfare was also a weakness. The Mongol attempts to invade Japan failed partly because they lacked naval expertise. The typhoons that destroyed the invasion fleets were lucky for Japan, but even without them, the Mongols would have struggled with amphibious operations. In Europe, the Mongols might have faced challenges if they had continued west. The terrain was more forested, castles were numerous and strong. Some historians believe the Mongols could have conquered Europe. Others think they would have overextended. We will never know because they withdrew after Ogedei's death. What we do know is that for over a century, the Mongol military was the gold standard. Armies across the world tried to copy their tactics. The use of horse archers, the emphasis on mobility, the coordination of multiple units. These concepts influenced military thinking for generations. Even today, military historians study the Mongol campaigns. The principles of speed, deception, intelligence gathering, and psychological warfare remain relevant. Genghis Khan's military genius lay not in brute force, but in organization, adaptability, and the efficient use of resources. He took the scattered warriors of the steppes and forged them into a disciplined, professional army. He created a system where talent was rewarded, where innovation was encouraged, and where loyalty was absolute. It was this system, as much as individual battles, that built an empire. And it is this system that makes Genghis Khan one of history's greatest military leaders. The circumstances surrounding Genghis Khan's death remain shrouded in mystery. Even the exact date is uncertain, though most sources place it in August 1227. What is clear is that he died during the campaign against the Western Xie, and that his death was initially kept secret to prevent chaos. But how did he die? History offers several contradicting accounts. One version from Chinese sources suggests he was injured during a siege. An arrow or catapult stone struck him, causing wounds that eventually proved fatal. Another account, also from Chinese chroniclers, claims he fell from his horse during a hunt. The fall caused internal injuries that worsened over time. Persian sources suggest illness, perhaps an infection or disease contracted during the campaign. There are even more colorful legends.
One tale, perhaps apocryphal, claims that a captured Western Xia princess concealed a blade and fatally wounded him. Another story suggests he was injured by a horse kick during a drunken celebration. The truth is lost to time. What matters is that the great Khan, who had survived countless battles and campaigns, met his end not in glorious combat, but from injury or illness. It was, in a way, a reminder of mortality. Even the mighty Genghis Khan could not escape death. His final instructions to his sons and generals were clear. Complete the destruction of the Western Xia. Do not allow any of the royal family to survive. He also urged his sons to remain united. He knew that the empire's greatest threat would come from within, from the ambitions of his descendants. According to the secret history of the Mongols, the oldest account of his life, Genghis Khan expressed regret that he would not live to see the empire's full expansion. But he believed that his sons and grandsons would complete what he had begun. After his death, his body was prepared for transport back to Mongolia. The funeral procession was solemn but also secretive. Legend says that anyone who encountered the procession was killed. This ensured that the route remained unknown. 40 horses and 40 maidens were reportedly sacrificed at the funeral, though the details are vague. The goal was to ensure that Genghis Khan's burial site would remain hidden forever. Why such secrecy? Several theories exist. One is spiritual. Mongols believed that disturbing a burial site could anger the spirits. Keeping the location secret protected Genghis Khan's eternal rest. Another theory is practical. Graves of great leaders often contained treasures. Keeping the location hidden prevented grave robbers. There is also a strategic reason. If enemies knew where Genghis Khan was buried, they might desecrate the site as an act of revenge. By making the location unknown, his followers ensured that no enemy could dishonor his memory. The most commonly cited location is the Khenti Mountains, near the Anan River where Genghis Khan was born. It is a sacred region, beautiful and remote. The area is called the Ik Korrig, the Great Taboo, and has been protected for centuries. But no tomb has ever been found. Over the years, archaeologists and treasure hunters have searched. Expeditions have combed the mountains and valleys. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and other modern technologies have been employed. Nothing conclusive has emerged. Some researchers believe the burial site was deliberately obscured. Perhaps a river was diverted to flow over it. Perhaps trees were planted to hide any markers. Others think that the tomb might be in a completely different location. Some theories place it in the Altai Mountains or even further west. There are also those who believe the tomb was never a fixed structure. Perhaps Genghis Khan's remains were placed in a simple grave, marked only by natural features, with no monument to draw attention. In Mongol culture, simplicity in death was respected. A great leader did not need a grand tomb. His legacy was his empire, his descendants, and the memory of his deeds.
In 2004, a joint Mongolian-American expedition searched for the tomb using advanced technology. They identified several promising sites, but found nothing definitive. The Mongolian government eventually restricted access to the Ik Korrig, citing cultural and spiritual concerns. Many Mongols believe the tomb should remain undiscovered. It is part of the sacred mystery of their greatest hero. Disturbing it would be disrespectful, even sacrilegious. There is poetry in the mystery. Genghis Khan, who conquered half the known world, rests in an unmarked grave, unknown and undisturbed. It is a humility that contrasts with the grandeur of his achievements. While his tomb remains hidden, his descendants ensured that his memory lived on. Ogedei, and later Menke and Kublai, honored their ancestor. Temples were built, though not at the burial site. Rituals were performed to honor his spirit. The secret history of the Mongols, compiled in the years after his death, served as both a historical record and a sacred text. It recounted Genghis Khan's life, his struggles, his victories, and his wisdom. It was meant to guide future generations. For centuries, the secret history was kept secret, known only to Mongol nobility. It was not widely available until modern times. Today, it is one of the most important sources for understanding Genghis Khan and the early Mongol Empire. In Mongolia, Genghis Khan is more than a historical figure. He is a symbol of national identity, resilience, and pride. His image is everywhere. Statues, monuments, currency, and even the main airport in Ulaanbaatar bear his name. Every year, Mongolians celebrate his legacy. Traditional festivals honor the customs and values he promoted. Yet even in Mongolia, there is nuance. Some modern Mongolians grapple with his legacy of violence. How do you honor a conqueror who caused so much suffering elsewhere? Most Mongolians focus on his role as a unifier. Before Genghis Khan, the Mongol tribes were divided, weak, and preyed upon by stronger neighbors. He brought them together. He gave them strength, law, and purpose. His military conquests are seen as necessary for survival and eventual prosperity. Outside Mongolia, perceptions vary. In China, he is part of history, a founder of the Yuan dynasty. His legacy is acknowledged, though with some ambivalence. In Central Asia and the Middle East, memories of Mongol invasions are darker. But even there, some recognize the cultural exchanges and administrative innovations the Mongols brought. In Russia, the Mongol period is often viewed negatively, though modern historians emphasize the complexity of Mongol rule. In the West, Genghis Khan has shifted from a symbol of barbarism to a subject of fascination. Biographies, documentaries, and novels explore his life from multiple angles. He is increasingly seen not as a simple villain or hero, but as a historical figure whose impact, for better or worse, shaped the modern world. The mystery of his tomb adds to the legend. It is a final enigma, a reminder that some secrets remain beyond our reach. Perhaps it is fitting. Genghis Khan conquered the known world, but his final resting place remains unconquered, untouched by time. As you drift towards sleep, imagine those remote mountains. Somewhere, beneath the grass and stones, lies the body of a man who changed history. No monument marks the spot. No inscription records his deeds. Just the wind whispering through the valleys, carrying the memory of the great Khan. And so we come to the end of our journey through the life of Genghis Khan and the rise of the Mongol Empire. From a boy named Temujin, abandoned on the steppes, to the great Khan who built the largest empire the world has ever known. His story is one of struggle, ambition, brilliance, and ruthlessness. He unified the Mongol tribes, he conquered kingdoms from China to Persia. He created laws, promoted trade, and facilitated the exchange of ideas across continents. He also brought destruction on a scale that still echoes through history. He was a man of contradictions, a visionary and a destroyer, a lawgiver and a conqueror, a father and a warrior. His legacy is woven into the fabric of our world. The borders he crossed, the peoples he united, the fear he inspired, the trade routes he secured, all of these shaped the course of history. As you close your eyes and let sleep take you, carry with you the image of those endless steps, the wind, the horses, the distant mountains. Somewhere in those mountains, the great Khan rests, his tomb unmarked, his legend eternal. May you find peace in your dreams, as he found peace at last, beneath the land he called home. Good night. Tomorrow, you're having a great day.